Sometimes things happen that we can't quite put our finger on. We don't really know why they happened or how they happened. It's sort of outside of the realm of, our understanding. And, it's hard for us to compartmentalize what transpired, but, we always find a way. And, if you try hard enough, there's an old saying that goes, if you can't explain something, don't try, because you're gonna end up hurting yourself thinking too hard about that one, and you don't want to do that because that's gonna mess you up in the long run. So if you could just reach into your pocket for me and oh, what's that in your hand? What you got there in your hand? You just pull out your pocket. What's that? Oh, that's 2 tickets. 2 tickets to the Bonkers Theater. Gubble Gums was a 90s pop icon and hip-hop artist, known for his hit song Gubble Gum and for his upbeat rap that he did for a popular children's media franchise. The man was a lyrical whiz, was one of the biggest stars in America until eventually fading into obscurity. He had continued to release albums that garnered little to no attention and lukewarm critical reception. Despite all of this, people still remembered Gubble Gums for his eccentric personality and couple of hits. Gubble decided it was time that he had made a change in his career in a last-ditch effort to remain relevant. He sat in front of his TV in his big Hollywood mansion, flipping through the channels. "Oh, these channels are lame," he said aloud to himself as he flipped through various news stations covering increasing tension in the Middle East. After a few more channel flips, he landed on something that caught his eye. It was 2 well-dressed homosexual brothers who were renovating old dilapidated houses and turning them into livable abodes, complete with IKEA furniture. The 2 men spoke into the camera to the audience. "We're the house-buying boys, and we'll buy your old house and turn it into a brand new one." "That's it," thought Gubble Gums. "I could buy up all the old gross mansions and use my massive paychecks I get from the licensing and royalties from my 2 90s hits to bling them out into turbo mansions for up-and-coming celebrities. And I could even hire a camera crew to follow me around while I do it and make money selling it as a TV show." Gubble Gums looked down at the corner of the screen and at the name of the channel. It was on the Home Renovation Network channel. He pulled out his phone and called up the network and asked if they would be interested in doing the show. The person on the phone was excited that the Gubble Gums of Gub Gum fame was on the line. They excitedly set up a pitch meeting the following morning. Gubble Gums stayed up all night working really hard to figure out his pitch to the Home Renovation Network. He racked his brain over and over, ironing out the greatest pitch that would sell the show faux show. He then came up with the perfect, most bestest idea for the pitch and completed it just in time for the big presentation. The next morning, Gubble Gums stepped into the big boardroom full of really important people from the Home Renovation Network, who glared down at Gubble Gums with their beady eyes, perched atop their lofty chairs. Gubble Gums hit them with his signature shuffle and juked and jived about the room. The way he moved was unbelievable. The important people couldn't believe their eyes. Gubble Gums, began beatboxing and creating a funky beat as he shuffled his feet. He jumped onto a table and began rapping out his pitch to the people. He shuffled down the table rapping and beatboxing, knocking all the papers that were on the table onto the ground. When he reached the end of the table, he did a really cool flip and landed in the splits before popping back up to his standing position and ending in a cool pose, dropping his mic to the ground. The important people cheered and loved the presentation and immediately signed on Gubble Gums to produce a minimum of 2 seasons of his TV show. Now was the most difficult part for Gubble Gums. He had to find the gross mansions to flip and make a profit off of. Gubble Gums was assigned a crew to follow him around, and so he set out to make his very first episode. Gubble Gums and his crew set out down the old Hollywood Road and up the old Hollywood Hill in an old Hollywood van. On top of the old Hollywood Hill lay an old dilapidated mansion. Some said the place was haunted, but Gubble Gums didn't believe in such myths. Gubble Gums pulled the old Hollywood van up to the gates of the old Hollywood mansion and put it in park. Gubble Gums and crew piled out the old Hollywood van and grabbed at the gates. They all started to rattle the gates as hard as they could and shake them until they eventually fell to the ground, kicking up a bunch of dust into the air. The group coughed and hacked, but heroically pushed forward through the dust and debris and into the mansion's overgrown garden. In the garden, the group was assaulted by vines that bound their ankles and tripped them, causing them to fall into sharp thorns that cut them from head to toe. The men and boys rolled around and cried out in pain as the thorns dug their way in. The group dug their way down into the dirt and kept digging deeper until they found themselves past the roots. They then dug their way out from underneath and found themselves at the steps of the porch leading up to the main entrance. The group made their way up to the front door, and Gubble Gums walked up to it and gave it a polite knock to see if anyone was home. It didn't seem that anyone was, so Gubble Gums naturally kicked the door in. The door went flying and shattered into a million pieces. Everyone was so shocked by Gubble Gums' strength, and the cameraman was really happy that he was able to capture the epic feat on camera. The group piled in, and Gubble Gums started swinging his arms and smashing up all the antique furniture and paintings. "What are you doing?" cried a small voice. Gubble Gums looked around. "Who said that?" he asked. The little man clambered out of the dark. He was in a small little suit and tie, and rolled over to Gubble Gums and pushed his pointer finger against Gubble Gums' belly. "What are you doing in my house? You're making a mess out of it and destroying everything," the little man cried. "I'm sorry, little man. I didn't know this was your house. I thought it was abandoned," Gubble Gums explained. "Well, it's not," the little man corrected. "It's my home." "I'm sorry, little man," Gubble Gums said to the little man. "How about we fix up your home and turn it into a pimped out crib?" The little man looked up at Gubble Gums with tears in his eyes. "Really? You would do that for a little small creature like me?" he asked. "I would do anything for you, little man," Gubble Gums said as he picked up the little man in his arms, rocking him back and forth. "Because I love you," he said as he planted a kiss on the little man's forehead. The little man blushed and caressed Gubble Gums' face. "I love you too, Gubble Gums," the little man said lovingly. Gubble Gums and his crew began work on the old mansion and used all of their tools and expertise to update the mansion to cutting-edge standards. They installed a futuristic elevator that could go from one floor to another. They also installed a refrigerator that could dispense both water and ice. They put a jukebox in the billiards room and a Mercedes in the garage. The little man was elated. He was getting so much free stuff. Never before in his life had anyone given him a bunch of free stuff. All of his life leading up to this point, he had fought and struggled harder than anyone. He was born to normal-sized parents who looked down at him because he was of little stature. He didn't fit in with any of the other siblings because they were all normal-sized too. His family was so horrified of his little stature that the only thing they saw fit to do was to make him work day and night out in the fields. The little man worked the fields with all of his might, using various tools created for normal-sized people. None of the tools were easy for him to use, but he still persisted. It didn't matter if it was a thunderstorm, a blizzard, or a heat wave. No matter what, that little man was out in that field working. Sooner or later, the little man's body started to give out on him. It was about the 14th winter when it finally did. His family came out to the field to find his little body face down in about a foot of snow. His family then took him to the hospital, which refused to treat him because it was a hospital for normal people. They directed his family to take him to a little hospital, and so they did. The little man had been in a coma for about 9 months, and not once did his family visit him. After 37 months, the little man finally awoke from his coma. The little man had been abandoned by his family. He was left to his own devices and a hospital bill of $326,972.43. The little man had no home and nowhere to turn. He wandered the dark, wet, cold streets until he found himself out front of a disgusting dive bar with a now hiring sign. With nowhere to turn, the little man walked in and approached the bartender about whatever positions may be open. The bartender explained to the little man that they were in a desperate need for a nutcracker, crack peanuts, for customers too weak or too inebriated to do so themselves. The little man happily agreed to the job and stood up on the bar, marching back and forth, asking customers if they needed any assistance with their peanuts. The little man drew quite the crowd because most people had never seen a real live nutcracker before. Most were used to the wooden ones you would see around Christmas time. The little man's hands were strong from the work he had done in the fields. They were rough and calloused and perfect for cracking peanuts. People were so impressed, they would bring the little man tougher and tougher nuts to crack. They'd bring macadamia nuts, Brazil nuts, and walnuts, all which he would crack with ease. The bar decided to start selling a variety of exotic nuts to customers for them to be cracked by the little man, who would receive generous tips for his services. Soon, the bar sold more nuts than it did beer or spirits. The bar began to rebrand into a nut-based restaurant that would serve all kinds of dishes and desserts that would contain nuts. There would be salads that the little man would crack the nuts over and then grind up in his hands before sprinkling on the salad. The little man would also repeat this process over any ice creams that a customer desired. The bar was rebranded to the Nutcracker and gained worldwide notoriety. It even had spawned a successful chain of restaurants and a few nut farms, which generated massive profit margins. The little man was known worldwide by his identity as the Nutcracker and would be seen on commercials selling his very own Nutcracker branded nuts, which flew off of the shelves. The little man had made enough money to pay off his medical bill for being in a coma and retired in an old Hollywood mansion on an old Hollywood hill. And not after 20 minutes of retiring and moving in, he had found himself face to face with Gubble Gums, who started to tear up the place before adding a bunch of modern conveniences, such as running water, internet, and cable, so he could watch the big game. The little man couldn't have been happier and was so thankful for Gubble Gums' generosity. So thankful, in fact, that he didn't mind that Gubble Gums was recording the whole thing for a television show. Gubble Gums finished renovating the house, which now looked like a future high-tech sci-fi house like you would see in the Jetsons or something, and waved goodbye to the little man as he wrapped up the first episode of his show. Gubble Gums returned to the Home Renovation Network office to show them the progress he had made with the first episode, and how he had made that little man's house livable. The board of important people thought it was so amazing, and they all stood around Gubble Gums and clapped. One guy even said, "3 cheers for Gubble Gums," and the rest said, "Hip hip hooray." And they all had such a great time and watched the rough cut of the first episode over and over again until one of them asked if the little man was the Nutcracker. Gubble Gums didn't know what they meant. He had never heard of the Nutcracker. "No, that little man is definitely the Nutcracker," the man said as he held up a tin of Nutcracker peanuts to the screen next to the little man. "So it is," said another board member. Gubble Gums had no idea that the little man was a world-famous food icon like Colonel Sanders, Papa John, or Robert Smith. The board then took the rough cut of the episode and put it in a little safe that they hoisted up on a rope pulley. "Hey, what you doing with my episode?" asked Gubble Gums. The board of important people told Gubble Gums that they couldn't afford to use a likeness of the little man on their television network, so they would have to cancel the show and never release the episode. Gubble Gums started to cry and was really upset because he really just wanted to make a fun TV show and didn't actually care if he became famous again off of it. He had really thought he was helping out that little man and doing something good and positive for a change. But he had seen that all of his efforts and goodwill didn't pay off in the end, until he realized that he still did help out that little man by giving him a future Jetsons house. So at the end of the day, Gubble Gums felt okay, and was still making money off of his couple of hit songs from the 90s, so he'd be okay.